Hi, so I wanted to share some thoughts by Ryan Endicott and Ethan McCord, both Iraq veterans. And before I do that, I wanted to share something that Chelsea Manning said not long after she was out of prison after 7 years in a sort of a torturous existence of a lot of solitary confinement for her daring to whistleblow about war crimes in Iraq. And we know what that, most of us would know what that's something that she released of the many things she released to WikiLeaks was the collateral murder video. And that was quite an eye-opener for people who'd been sheltered, the public who'd been sheltered from what's been going on in the Middle East since 9/11. So the collateral murder video was an awakening for some people who had fallen asleep that these war crimes are going on unabated. Well, I hope that people woke up to that. But anyway, some did anyhow. So that was a very important, the WikiLeaks exposure of war crimes was very, very important for the world. And Chelsea Manning is a hero, and she's in prison now, again. So is Julian Assange has been expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy by a corrupt Lenin Moreno, and he's now in prison too. So isn't this wonderful? Journalists and whistleblowers, that's how we treat them. So I wanted to share with you the just a, sort of an excerpt of an interview Chelsea Manning did with Democracy Now!, which I think can resonate with us that this is what we need to do. This will resonate with some.
But I don't feel like it's this, I mean, in this environment, in this place, this time that we're in is what I feared because I saw, and I've realized it's expanded more and more that, it's not just the military, it's not just the intelligence community, it's police, it's the justice system, it's immigration, like all these systems are overlapping and they're suffocating people deliberately and methodically over decades. And this has been a continuing, like people have been building this whirling death machine of power for decades now. And you can focus in on a particular war or a particular moment or a particular controversy, but it's the overwhelming awe of the giganticness of this system that has driven me to try to fight back. And we need to start, we don't need to fix these systems. We need to stop them. We need to push back on them, whether it's immigration or whether it's the military or whether it's, the intelligence apparatus, because they're all a part of the same system. And people are suffering, and we can't wait. We can't wait anymore. We can't wait for change. We is us. It's whoever we are. It's solidarity. We is solidarity in a word. I use this word, and I use this phrase in prison whenever I was overwhelmed, when I was I was facing insurmountable odds, and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I just kept going. I kept fighting, even though it looked like it was futile. And that's how I feel now. We keep fighting and we can't see the end of it, but we can continue to push forward even if we don't have, even if we can't see it, we actually do have this. We do got this. And, it was a mantra that I used to repeat to myself while I was in prison, but, it's still something that I keep saying and keep saying. And yeah.
At the time when she did this interview in Democracy Now!, she looked fairly vulnerable and she looked traumatized, like you would imagine. She hadn't been his Alia again. Alia is wearing a bird alert collar. We don't like to dress up our cats. So anyway, so she was looking fairly traumatized when she came out of prison, as you would, and now I sort of wonder how she's going in this current situation that she's in now in another prison. And I'm hoping that people are writing her letters just as hopefully we're writing Julian Assange letters, because she said when you're in prison like that and you lose a lot of idea of time and you think that you've been completely abandoned, she said letters to prisoners mean so much. So I will leave her the address details for Chelsea Manning in the prison she's in, and also Julian Assange, because we need to support these people in whatever way we can, because they're heroes and because they are doing their best to keep the world in keep some sort of freedom of speech and freedom of information in the world, and it's just an important thing that we should all be doing. But anyway, these excerpts from Ethan McCord, and can you see the little patty melon in the background there? They come up every evening to eat, and just to have some nibbles, and then they go off and eat their usual meals, the usual native stuff that they eat. But we give them little pellets, and they love them. And there's about 24 of them come up. Anyway, so Ethan McCord and Ryan Endicott, they're two Iraq veterans, and if you want to find out more about what's happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's two veterans, Mike Preisner and Spencer Rapone, and they have a podcast called Eyes Left. It's a military podcast hosted by two anti-war army veterans of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, Spencer Rapone and Mike Preisner, covering issues from a left-wing and socialist perspective. It gives updates and progressive commentary on military news, war, developments, failings of military leadership, veterans issues, radical military history, and how U.S. troops can resist Trump and U.S. foreign policy. So if you know anyone who is trying to get out of the military and they really don't know how to do it, then please tune in to Eyes Left podcast. And they have very good advice on how one can do that, extract oneself when you want to get the hell out, they basically say, of these immoral wars. So check that one out, Eyes Left podcast. So I'm going to leave you with these two excerpts. One is from Ethan McCord, and he is an Iraq veteran, and he was actually one of the soldiers who came in. This is connected to Chelsea Manning and the collateral murder video. He came in after the massacre of those two Reuters journalists and those other people that were there, and including the father of two children, and one of the children was mortally wounded. I don't think he would have survived, and the other little girl, who knows? But so there was a whole bunch of people, and you can find that collateral murder video online if you just search for WikiLeaks collateral murder. So anyway, Ethan McCord was that soldier who went into the van after the massacre, and he thought that the little boy was dead because he had a terrible head wound, and so he grabbed the little girl, and the father, of course, was he was just blown to bits because the shells that they fire from those Apache helicopters are quite large, like this. He said something like that. It's about that long. They're about that long, and so they just blow people to bits, basically. And he said, when he arrived at the scene, there was just it looked like sort of something from a horror movie, where people with half their head missing and just smashed to bits. It was just a complete. And he said the smell was just dreadful. And he said he'll never forget that smell. And then he went to the vehicle, the van, where the father and the two children that came up to see how the people were after being killed, if there was any survivors. And they deliberately, attacked that van that came to try and help those people. Then he went to the vehicle in the van where the father and the two children were, and grabbed the little girl, and he raced over to he raced across the town to go to drop her off at I suppose the command place where they were, and his commander in that particular station there said, "What the effing sort of thing are you doing? Basically go back and secure the area." He didn't really care about that little girl, and he said he'll never forget the noise that she made when he was running across with her. He also so he went back and I think he also rescued the little boy. Apparently, the soldier that was with him when he went into the van just threw up when he saw what they had done. So when he got the little boy and he ran across, and the boy's eyes rolled back in his head, he had a severe head injury, and he said that he thought he was dead, but he wasn't. But I think that would have probably I don't think he probably would have survived. But anyway, that was a turning point for Ethan McCord, where he just thought that they were the terrorists. The U.S. military were the terrorists. Because he realized, that this is just they're just terrorizing the population. So that's when he, of course he was mocked and ridiculed when he said he needed to see a counselor. His commanding officer said something really misogynist to him. It's interesting how all these things are they're clumped together, the racism and misogyny and all of that. He said, get the sand out of your vagina and get back to it. It's that sort of disgusting misogyny that would go with everything. I mean, when you know the amount of rape that happens in the military and how it is ignored, or the women who actually report these rapes are often sort of bullied, and they're ignored, and they're driven out. So it's not surprising that a commanding officer would say something so misogynist, because misogyny is kind of like all part of it. So I'm not saying every soldier is misogynist, but I think that's just all part of the whole toxic masculinity, military racist sort of thing. It's all clumped together. So anyway, that's how he was treated by his commanding officer, is basically, suck it up and get the hell out, get back to work. And he was really desperate, and he actually he secretly went to see a counselor, and then unfortunately they found out, and then he was bullied more and more, and they tried to get rid of him. And I think he was kicked out because he started to really suffer psychologically terribly after this event, and he even to the point where he tried to kill himself twice. And that 22 soldiers every single day suicide, and as a result of things that they should not have been participating in, the violence, the way that they're discarded when they get back home. Ethan McCord realized that the Veterans Affairs was really just, in some ways, a way of funneling money through to Big Pharma, because he was put on a whole bunch of pills, just 13 different pills, and he said he was like a zombie. And I think this is sort of like, this is the thing. It's they're not interested. I mean, this gets proven time and time again. Every war, veterans are just discarded. That's just how it is. They're treated appallingly. They're pilled up, and I'm sure if you talk to somebody about their experience since being back, if they have any injury or if they have PTS, which is actually something that's just almost par for the course for anybody that's been to Iraq and Afghanistan, unless they're a psychopath and they have no sense of empathy or anything. But most human beings have something, and it all sort of manifests after they get back, and suddenly they're supposed to fit into society after they've been just massacring people. And I suppose it all takes it out of context too, because as Ethan McCord said, you have soldiers who are supporting you at the time when you're going through this, and then you get back home and of course you're sort of isolated. And I don't know what kind of mental health support they get when they come back, but it can't be that good, because 22 veterans killing themselves every day, I mean, that's appalling. That's the cost, the death count of these military members killing themselves is greater, much greater than the actual soldiers that are killed in the war. So, these things haunt people forever and a day, and this is what goes on. You can't take your mind out of your head and sort of divorce it from what's going on, and it's just sort of it's probably the constant guilt and the constant awful images and and not being able to sleep, and then the pills they put you on, and then the injuries. I mean, there's a lot of genital injuries where people get their genitals destroyed, and there's, all these amputations. And the oligarchs and the government, the war criminals that send people off to these wars, which are just for resources and hegemony, they don't care. And all these people tend to have always managed to escape the draft themselves, have you noticed? Because rich people usually don't send their children to war. They get poorer people to do that for them. So anyway, this is worth a watch, this Ethan McCord testimony about what happened immediately after he rescued that little child from that van with her dead father and her mortally wounded brother. And then Ryan Endicott, who was speaking to Abby Martin on Breaking the Set, and that was 5 years ago now, and nothing's really changed. Ryan Endicott is a peace activist, so is Ethan McCord. There's one silver lining there might be many, but the one silver lining is that there are people who actually become peace activists and anti-war activists after they go through that. It's sad sometimes that that's what it takes, but better that than to... I mean, at one point, Ethan McCord said there was a point in time where he wanted to kill his own children. He was so messed up. He wanted to kill his own children and kill his wife. I'm not sure why men often go that way. It's a very odd thing that men sort of want to externalize and kill other people en masse, but that's for another video. So anyway, that's sort of how it is, and this is why collateral murder is important. Some people say, oh well, there was stuff out there about it. No, there wasn't. There wasn't stuff out there about the wars what's going on, and how many wars even. Like Obama expanded to 7 wars, so people don't even know really even how many wars are going on. They don't even see the caskets covered with flags. They don't see the collateral murder videos, which Ethan McCord said is a daily occurrence in Iraq. I'll repeat that. He said the collateral murder type video, what goes on in that video, is a daily occurrence in Iraq. And another veteran from Afghanistan, Clifton Hicks, who was on the Eyes Left podcast, he said at one time they were going into the town of Abu Ghraib in, I think that's Afghanistan, and he said that he saw 800 people, including animals, all dead. He said they'd all been massacred, and this is sort of like a free fire thing that they do, basically, where they're given orders to just kill everything, people, non-human animals, the whole thing. Whatever's moving, you kill them. So he said that was, it was sort of so shocking, and he also tried to get out. And it really took some doing, and they really gave him a hard time. I mean, this is what they're actually, if you have any sort of feelings about these things, about these terrible, the massacres and all of that, if you have any sort of feelings about that, then you are persecuted and bullied, and they try to do everything they can to make your life miserable and to shut you up, because it's a propaganda war, isn't it? The thing is, you don't want people to hear that sort of stuff. You don't want veterans talking about it. You don't want anybody talking about this. You want it to go under the radar so they can keep stealing resources and massacring people and creating managed chaos in the Middle East and elsewhere, and they don't want to fuss about it. So people like Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and Ethan McCord and Ryan Endicott and anybody who is talking about the immorality of war, the immorality of the imperialist wars that are massacring people every day, just like in collateral murder video, they want to shut people up. And one of the ways to shut people up is to not so that they don't have information about that, and that's why they're trying to knock off WikiLeaks and knock off Julian Assange. And eventually they'll come for other independent journalists, and then they'll come for everybody else. It's that whole, that saying from the Holocaust, You know, first they came for this group, and then they came for that group, and I didn't say anything, and eventually they came for me. That's what a lot of people don't realize. When you just allow these things to happen, eventually the algae is all over the pond. You know, you sort of don't realize it's happening, or you may realize it and you don't care, and then next thing it's all over the pond. And it's too late. So anyway, please stay with me and check out these 2 excerpts of these veterans' testaments, and then I hope that you will support whistleblowers, support journalists like Julian Assange, and anybody else who is putting out real independent news, not this fake propaganda that supports these wars. And capitalism benefits from these wars. Capitalism and imperialism are inextricably mixed, inextricably entwined. And so anyway, thank you very much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching. Oh, and please consider subscribing to my channel, Faint Signals from Vega. You can find that at Vegan Trove on YouTube. And please hit the like button if you happen to be there. And please leave comments. I always enjoy your comments. So thanks so much for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.
More that keep walking by, and one of them has a weapon.
It was the video that put WikiLeaks on the map, turned the tide of war in Iraq, and landed Private First Class Bradley Manning in military detention. But for Army veteran Ethan McCord, it was just another day on duty.
The helicopters, they were approximately about 1.5 miles away when they were zooming in on these guys. And from looking at it now, you can't see anything. I mean, that right there is obviously a camera dangling, if you were to really pay attention. That guy has an AK-47 right there.
Baghdad, Iraq. 2007, the 216th Battalion was out patrolling a volatile part of the city.
I was about 5 blocks away, 4 or 5 blocks away to the left of the screen. This was a battalion-wide mission.
And then the situation turned deadly.
Come on, fire!
We heard the Apaches firing.
Ethan and his infantry squad began running toward the scene to provide support. Again, the Apache helicopter opened fire.
Come on!
When he arrived on the scene, the Apache guns were quiet. The accused enemies were dead.
This guy just drove over a body. Yeah.
One guy's head, the top of his head was completely off, and his brains were on the ground, and the smell still haunts me today. I don't even know how to describe it.
When he approached the van, a noise Ethan wasn't expecting, a cry of a little girl.
I think she was 4 years old, and you could tell she had a wound to the stomach. And I remember her looking at me, and the blood around her eyes made her eyes so ghostly white.
Ethan grabbed the girl and ran into a nearby building. He then picked glass out of her eyes so she could blink and handed her off to a medic.
I went back outside and was told to take pictures, so I started taking pictures at the inside of the van.
And that's when he discovered the little boy.
And that's me.
What's in your arms?
That is a little boy who I originally thought was dead.
Despite their injuries, the children survived. But part of Ethan changed forever that day.
But I couldn't stop myself from crying. I couldn't stop myself from feeling the way that I was feeling.
When he did seek mental help, he says he was mocked by his commanders and threatened with expulsion from the military.
That's when I started drinking. Mental health had given me prescriptions, 13 prescriptions of Geodon, Depakote, Prozac. I mean, I was a zombie.
But things got worse.
I started daydreaming of killing my own children and everybody around me.
So Ethan took matters into his own hands.
I'd already begun drinking pretty heavily, and I downed all the pills, and I drank a fifth of Crown Royal, 10 o'clock in the morning. And my wife at the time found me.
That was the first time Ethan tried to take his own life. After that, he was dismissed from the Army.
I was kicked out with no disability, no benefits from the Army whatsoever.
He returned to Wichita, and then Ethan attempted suicide for a second time.
I actually wrote a poem right before I did it, before I put the gun in my mouth. And I don't know if I really want to talk about it.
Ethan's story is tragic, yes, but he certainly isn't alone. Tens of thousands of military veterans suffer the effects of PTSD long after they leave the battlefield. And for those who simply can't cope with the stress, oftentimes they choose to end their own lives. They're fathers and brothers, sons and soldiers, and now they're simply another casualty in American wars abroad. In the past 2 years alone, Ethan has lost 8 of his veteran brothers to suicide, and his outlook on life hasn't improved with time.
I know that I will never, ever get better. I'll never get over this.
For the world, the collateral murder video was just another black mark on an unpopular war. For Ethan, it was a catalyst that made him question the entire purpose of the Iraq War.
You know, America, John Wayne, you know, we wear the white hat. Americans are always out. All we're doing is trying to help people. That's all we do. We're just trying to spread freedom and democracy through the barrel of a gun.
History will be the ultimate determinant of how the Iraq War is viewed. But for Ethan and so many soldiers suffering from post-war stress, the future is far and the past is too much to cope with.
I didn't see the hands of who hasn't seen Collateral Murder yet. Who hasn't seen that? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically tell the story of what happened that day. We were in Kamalaya, Iraq. We were tasked out that morning to do knock-in searches. The Apaches were providing overwatch for us. We had a small firefight, probably about 4 to 5 blocks away from where this incident took place. We heard the Apaches open fire, and what you have to understand is the Apaches, they don't shoot just like little rounds. They shoot 30mm rounds, which are about that big. I didn't know what was going on at the time. I was just told to move to that position. I was on foot, and when I was one of the first 6 guys to run up onto the scene, and what I saw was a group of men on the corner who had been completely obliterated. These rounds explode when they hit, and to me, at the time, they didn't look human. They looked like something you would actually see out of a bad horror movie. Like, oh, this can't be real. I don't know if I thought that, you know, maybe my emotions were kind of shutting everything down and saying, okay, this can't be real. But one of the first things I remember hearing was a little girl crying. And I knew that the cry was coming from the van that was there. And I ran up to the passenger side door with one of the privates who was with me, and we looked inside the van, and the private that I was with started vomiting and ran away because he couldn't bear to look at the children the way they were. What I saw was a little girl. She was probably about 4 years old, sitting on the bench seat with a severe belly wound and glass in her hair and in her eyes. She couldn't blink or close her eyes, and she was crying like it wasn't a pain cry. It was a cry that me having children, knowing that my daughter was the same age as this little girl, waking up from a horrible nightmare in the middle of the night, and just it was almost blood curdling. Next to her, in the middle of the bench seat, half on the floorboard with his head resting on the bench seat, was a boy about 7 years old. I immediately thought he was dead because he had a severe wound to the right side of his head. And in the driver's seat was who I assumed was the father, the way he was hunched over them in a protective manner. And he was completely destroyed. There was no way that he had survived. I grabbed the little girl out of the van, yelled for a medic, and we took her to the house that was directly behind the vehicle, where I took off my gloves, got water, and rinsed the wounds, checked for any exit wounds, other wounds that she might have had, and was picking glass out of her eyes with my hands so that she can blink. That's when in the video you can hear the medic say that there's nothing else we can do here, she needs to be evac'd. He takes the little girl and he runs her to the Bradley. I go back outside to the van, and I don't know actually why I went to the van. I thought that the boy was dead and the father was dead, but when I went back out there, the boy took a labored breath, and it's when I started screaming out that the boy's alive, the boy's alive. And I picked him up in my arms and started running towards the Bradley with him, the whole time telling him, it's going to be okay, don't die, don't die. And at this point, he looked up at me, just for a split second, then his eyes rolled back into his head. And at that moment, I thought he had died in my arms. But I got him to the Bradley, and when I took him to the Bradley, my commanding officer, or my platoon leader, was there. And he told me that I needed to quit worrying about these MFing kids and to go pull security. At the time, the only thing I could think of was, roger that, and I went to pull security. While sitting on the rooftop, I could hear them firing the Hellfire missiles into houses. I saw the pictures of the families that were in these buildings. There were no armed men in these buildings. They were just families, women, children, who were killed. I got back to the FOB later that day, and I remember thinking to myself, I was like, there's no way that we did that. It had to have been the men on the corner. There was one guy who had an RPG and one guy who had an AK-47. And, from being over there, you're like, okay, well, these guys are obviously insurgents if they have weapons, not knowing that these other men were cameramen. And what frequently happens in Iraq is if there's a person with a camera, people will come out of their homes and say, hey, look at me, this is what I have, put me on TV, put me on the news, make me famous, now pay me for my picture. There was no RPG rounds in the RPG. So that, to me, my reaction is that I don't think that they were armed to fight us. They were just showing off for the cameramen that were there. But later on that night in the FOB, while I was washing the blood of the children off of me, I couldn't really cope with it. I was having a hard time dealing with the fact that we did that. The Apaches did that. So I went to my staff sergeant who was in my line, in my chain of command, and I told him I think I need to see mental health. I need to go talk to somebody because I'm having a hard time dealing with what I had just seen, what I had witnessed, what I was a part of. And he laughed at me and told me to get the sand out of my vagina and to quit being a pussy and to suck it up and to be a soldier. And so, you kind of like, okay, well, there's nothing else I can do. So you just kind of suck it up. You push everything down, you bottle it up. But that anger and that rage sits inside you, and it gets to the point where it just bubbles over. And you get so angry that you start yelling at people who don't deserve it. Family members, your privates, soldiers who are your brothers. And that was just one incident, and I've been saying this for a long time. That was one incident of many that you guys got to see. Things like this happened almost on a daily basis in Iraq. It may not have been an Apache, it could have been a Bradley. I saw a Bradley fire on a van load of children, nothing more than children, and watch the Iraqi police pull bodies out, pieces of children, and the whole time they're looking at us shaking their heads. And it's again, that was one incident, but you guys can see from that one incident that we shouldn't be there, that we're over there and we're killing innocent people. These are people who are only trying to live their lives and the best that they can during an occupation. I got out of the Army in 2009. I was blown up in Iraq in November of 2007. I came home. My spine was broken. I had metal rods and pins in my back. the Army kicked me out on a Chapter 517, which states that everything that I had, my traumatic brain injury, my PTSD, and my broken spine, were all pre-existing conditions before I joined the military. So I got no benefits from the Army whatsoever. And I'm not the only one. This has happened to over 250,000 soldiers coming home from war. They're saying that, oh, they obviously had this PTSD long before they joined the Army. And, you know, it's not only are the people of Iraq and Afghanistan the victims, but soldiers are the victims themselves. They are being victimized every day, whether they have post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury or military sexual trauma. They're being placed right back into the same traumas that got them that to begin with. They're 4 or 5 deployments. You know, soldiers are just as much the victims, and once I realized that I was being victimized from the military and that they were using me, using what I grew up very conservative. I grew up thinking, you know, it's my duty to serve in the military. When 9/11 happened, I ran out and I joined the military. I have to go serve. I have to go fight the Muslims who attacked us on 9/11. And what I found strange is when I got to Iraq is I felt that I had more in common with the people over there than I did with the people who sent me to war to begin with. And so that day especially, the collateral murder video, I could no longer justify why I was in Iraq, what we were doing in Iraq. I was just watching innocent men, women, and children being slaughtered. There were no so-called insurgents. We would drive around waiting to start something. So,
Now, it's been 3 years since the U.S. officially ended its occupation of the country, but that doesn't refund the billions of dollars wasted nor bring back the million-plus people who have tragically died. In case you forgot, no weapons of mass destruction were ever found, and the only real legacy that remains is an abysmal mistake based on known falsehoods, a mistake that the corporate media itself was complicit in selling. But even though the conflict has officially ended, an ever-rising death toll continues to plague Iraq, the result of an ever-growing insurgency. So here to talk about the many lasting effects of the war as well as his experience on the battlefield, I'm joined now by Iraq War veteran Ryan Endicott. Thank you so much for coming on, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Ryan, you were only 20 years old when you joined the Marine Corps in 2004 and went on to serve in Iraq for 7 months. What drove you to join the Marines initially?
Well, after high school in 2002, when I graduated, I was working on a freight dock, making minimum wage. I had very little access to health care, very little access to advanced education or anything like that. I was working extended hours for very little pay. And when the war in Iraq started, being someone that grew up from New Jersey, I was very connected to the 9/11 events and the events that had transpired after that. And the media played a huge role in bringing me, into this into the conflict because of the fact that, at that time I wasn't privy to the media knowing for a fact 100% that the war was based on lies. And so at that point, with the patriotic fervor and the sort of environment that was being pushed forward by the media in conjunction with my lack of ability to, move up economically or socially whatsoever in the American ladder, it kind of made me feel like I had a sense of duty and a sense of honor that I could go and do, and at the same time get health care, get access to education, and get access to, guaranteed employment in a time in our country that was very tough for young adults.
Indeed. In a speech you gave in 2009 called Just Another Tuesday, you recount your experience as an infantryman in Iraq and that you were once punished for arresting a man instead of killing him. Can you expand on this?
Well, I was on post, and when this Iraqi came through my door in the post, I was at the government center in Ramadi, which is the capital of the Anbar province, where Fallujah is. And when this man came into my post, at that point, I had been, standing my post, and somehow he had gotten through all of the other security measures and gotten to my post. And so when I, arrested him and detained him, my command told me at that point that it was my fault. I should have killed him. He was in an area that is completely restricted for civilians, no questions asked. It doesn't matter if he had a gun or if he didn't have a gun. That's out the door. The fact is I should have killed him. And, so for me, during that time period, that was really tough for me to deal with. I had to go through all of the repercussions of being treated as though what I had done was wrong, and how, I was called a girl and all sorts of pejorative terms around this situation, and so after that, what I think is really important is that this is just one instance of that. And like, how many soldiers across this country are coming down with orders from command, telling them to commit these crimes, telling them to kill people that don't have weapons, specifically because of where they are, specifically because of how they've impacted this sort of post. And so what it shows is that there's a whole policy around this, and around the idea that soldiers can kill or can murder someone that doesn't have a weapon, and that's totally explainable by the command.
It's a horrifying culture, Ryan. Thank you for talking about that. I know it's probably not easy. Was there a particular moment while serving that changed your mind about the war, your purpose there, and actually drove you to become an anti-war activist?
Well, that was certainly the beginning of a long period of raids and patrols and going through people's homes and seeing these sorts of things that were happening. But certainly, we lost a couple of soldiers, and when we lost them, the command told us that they had found the triggerman. We went door to door and, in a very systematic way, began terrorizing the local population. And there's really no other explanation other than terrorizing the local population. And anyone above military age, being 14, 15 years old, was immediately detained, immediately had sandbags over their head. And so after this, I started to think to myself, what's going on here? I'm watching American soldiers die, I'm watching my friends die, and none of these people have anything to do with what's going on in America. And then I'm turning around and raiding people's homes, destroying their families, ripping their families apart, and, for what? And I started to see that the average Iraqi is not the enemy, is not my enemy, is not the enemy of the American people. The average Iraqi is not the one taking our homes, not the one denying us health care, not the ones kicking us out of our jobs and denying us social services. That's not the average Iraqi. And so I started to ask myself, so why am I here? Who am I here for? If I'm not here defending freedom, defending democracy, what am I here fighting for? And I started to see that, if you followed the money, it came down to the fact that I was deployed in support of a war that brought billions upon billions of dollars, even trillions, into the hands of weapons contractors, bankers, and oil tycoons.
Really sad and unfortunate state, Ryan. And every day, 22 veterans commit suicide in the U.S. Horrific statistic. What do you think is the main source behind this, and why is the government failing to adequately address what has now become an epidemic?
Well, I think what we can say is certainly clear is that, the VA and the government does not have the veterans' rights to health care and veterans' benefits at heart. That soldiers are not seen as the protectors of this country or the tip of the spear of literal freedom or democracy, but as soldiers to be sent and fight in wars that benefit the rich and that benefit Wall Street. And when we come home from these wars, we're expected to reintegrate into society with minimal benefits. My experience from the VA has been that many times the VA, in the same way that our entire healthcare system in this country revolves around, is not there to provide services with the budgets it's given, but to deny services, so that budget can then go towards the pharmaceutical companies, towards the GE making weird video games for costing millions of dollars that they want soldiers to go through, and all this funding that is supposed to go towards healing veterans when they come home is really just going to the pharmaceutical companies or these companies.
Ryan, let's talk about the horrific failed state of Iraq today. According to the UN, over 700 people were killed just last month. 2014 has seen the highest civilian death toll since the height of the occupation. Do you think this violence is a direct result of the U.S. war, and how do you personally feel seeing the radical factions that you were told to fight retake cities like Fallujah and Ramadi?
Well, I think that what this certainly shows is that while the war in Iraq might be over, the war on the Iraqi people is far from over. And that the country is devastated, the infrastructure is devastated. When I got to Ramadi, it was an active city. It had a couple 100,000 people. There was a souk, a marketplace. There was different communities of various class structure. And by the time I left, it was bombed to the ground, potholed with bullet holes, burning trash in the streets, no access to utilities, no access to clean water, no access to trash or any things like that. And so by the time I left, we could see that the entire infrastructure had been destroyed. And so certainly there's going to be increased violence in that. And then when you add into the fact that U.S. being there and that the soldiers being there is just heightening secular conflict that's going on and creating even more strife between different factions within the area than that was there before. Now you've got an area where kids who grew up 10 years old are now 18 10 years later. You know, kids who grew up 12, whatever, now they're in their 20s. And so these young adults are doing what they can to survive, and that's going to create a more violent environment. And on top of the fact that U.S. contractor presence in Iraq certainly is still massive.
And of course, I just wanted to jump in here really quick. We have about a minute left. But as an anti-war activist and organizer with March Forward, what's your message to young people today who are thinking of joining the military, and where can they go to find out more resources about how they can leave?
Well, marchforward.org is certainly a great resource for soldiers to come and find about how they can resist and how they can refuse to fight if they so choose. And it is our right to do that. It's our lives and it's our right. As for the young people, I would say that joining the military is not an option right now. There's already enough going on trying to find homes, trying to get access to health care, trying to get access to education. So going and fighting a war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria or wherever the U.S. government is going to send us to fight is second to the fight that's already being waged here at home.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Incredible. Ryan Endicott, Iraq War veteran, organizer with March Forward. Really appreciate you coming on.